Hey folks. Okay, well, this time around I want to talk a little bit about what it's going to look like as we're going through the process of actually writing our programs, debugging them, and getting them to execute, testing whether they work the way we want them to or not. So for the moment, I'm going to kind of assume that we've got a solution in mind, a design in mind, so we kind of know what it is we want to write in terms of a program. We're focusing right now on actually taking this idea that's in our head and using an editor, creating a C++ program that follows our design, and then going through the process of using the compiler like we were talking about earlier to translate that into an executable, running the executable, and seeing if it actually does what we want, see if it actually works the way that we want. And so what I'm going to talk about from this point of things is this edit, compile, and execute cycle. And this is something that's going to be burned into your brain by the end of this semester because it's something that you do over and over and over and over and over again. Edit a file that contains a bunch of C++ code, compile it to produce a new executable, and then running the executable to see if it works. So this cycle we're going to go through over and over and over. So the idea is that we're going to use some kind of an editor to create a file that has a bunch of C++ code in it, right? That's supposed to do whatever it is we want it to do. So you can, in fact, the files themselves are just plain text files that happen to contain C++ code. Now, usually we give them an extension that kind of tells us that we've got C++ code stored in something like this. So .cpp is the one that we'll use for the most part this semester. So you can use any text editor that you like. We'll take a look at a few of the ones that are available on our systems, since that's where you're going to be writing the code that you're submitting for labs and the project and that kind of thing. But you pick an editor that you like, you edit an existing file or create a new file, write a bunch of C++ code in it that hopefully does what we want it to do, and then we use a compiler. So that was the G++ that we looked at in an earlier video. Use a compiler to read that and try and translate it and produce an executable that we can run from that C++ code. So it's reading the one file that's got the C++ code in it, it's creating another file, a new file, that's going to be the executable. Now the compiler is following the rules of the language. So it's reading the C++ code that we've written, and it's essentially saying, does this code follow the grammar rules of the language? And if so, create the appropriate translation of it. Now the compilers tend to be very picky about those rules. Break the rules, the compiler throws up error messages or warnings and says, nope, I can't translate it, it's not grammatically correct. So we'll talk about that as we get there too. But it attempts to translate the files. If there are errors, it spits out these messages, and we have to go back and, if there's errors in it, it won't produce an executable for us. So we have to go back and fix our code, edit that high-level file again, fix the errors, and then compile it again. It finds more errors, we go back and fix those, try and compile again, it finds more errors, and this cycle goes on and on and on until eventually it compiles cleanly, doesn't produce any error messages. And that's the first moment when you'll see people sitting around in lab going, yay, throwing up their arms, and going, hey, it worked, yay, wonderful. And so at least it compiles at this point, and we've got an executable. At that point, we turn around and run the executable to see if it does what it does, or does what we want, rather. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't, then we go once again back to that high-level code, try and figure out what's wrong with our code, why doesn't it produce the results that we want, fix the code, compile it again, hope that we haven't introduced any new errors. If we've introduced new errors, then we've got to fix those and compile again, fix those and compile. So this cycle goes on and on and on, right? Edit, compile, and execute until you finally get the behavior that you want. So get used to this cycle. It is something that we're going to see a lot. And again, I'll go through and show you a couple of examples in a couple of minutes, show you what it looks like when you put an error in there, and show what it looks like when things go well. So yeah, this is pretty much running through what I've described. We use any editor we like, And we'll give you a choice of a bunch of different ones to use on our system, and there's others that you can use at home if you've got a C++ compiler at home. We either create new files containing C++ code or modify existing ones. Again, .cpp is the common extension we'll use for files that contain C++ code. Make sure that we save our changes, right? If we haven't saved it, then the compiler is going to be trying to translate the old version, not the updated version. So make your changes, save them, run the compiler. Again, our compiler is called G++, so that's the program that does the translation for us. Whatever the name of the C++ file is that we're trying to translate, and then we tell this -o is saying what's coming next is the name of the output file, the name of the executable I want you to create. So, and then the name of the executable itself. So this cycle of G++, the file we want translated, -o, and what we want to name the new executable that we can actually run. On Windows, you'll have to actually create extensions for these, and Linux extensions are not required, so I typically just throw an X on at the end to indicate that this thing's going to be an executable. So we've got our source code file, and we've got our executable. And again, if things compile cleanly, it will produce the executable for us, and we can then move on and try and run it. So if the compiler finds syntax errors, it'll spit out error messages, and I'll show you some of those in a second. If that's the case, we go back and edit, save, recompile until eventually it compiles cleanly. Once it has compiled cleanly, then we can run that program and see if it does what we want. So on Linux, on our systems, the way you're going to execute the program, since we're going to be in the location where that thing is stored, it's a dot, a slash, and then the name of the program we're trying to run. And again, we look at the behavior, see if it does what we actually want it to do. If it does, we're done. If not, then we go back and edit the file again and go through this whole process again until finally it does what we want. So let's see if we can run through a quick example. Again, don't worry too much about the C++ syntax for the moment. I'm just trying to show you the cycle that we're working through here. So I want to create a program that's just going to say hello. So the editor I'm using is called, well, it's actually called Vim, right? Here, why don't I do that? So there is currently no such file as sayhello.cpp. So I'll just show you what's in the current directory. So these are some of the examples from the last video. So what I'm going to do is create a brand new C++ source code file called sayhello.cpp, and in it, I'm going to put the code that's supposed to make this thing just print hello. Nothing very fancy. So I'm going to write some C++ code. This is actually telling it to use a C library that's got a bunch of print routines in it already, a main routine that's going to be where the execution of the program actually starts, and then the block of instructions that tell it what it's supposed to do. So I just want it to print hello and a new line. So this would actually be syntactically correct. I'm going to throw a syntax error in there, a failure to follow the grammar rules, just to show you what kinds of things might wind up happening. So maybe we'll throw a couple in there. So a couple of a missed semicolon and a typo. So I've edited my file, I've saved it, and I'm going to try and compile it. And the compiler should yell at me because this program is not grammatically correct. So I want it to translate this sayhello.cpp file, and I want it to produce an executable that I'm going to call sayhellox. And again, the compiler is going to yell at me if it finds problems. So sure enough, it's telling me that I've got this function called man, and it expected a semicolon in there. So that was the semicolon that I forgot to include. So let's fix that error. So we'll put the semicolon back in. And again, this is the idea. We go back in, we edit the file again, fix what we think the problem might be, and then we try and compile again. So we'll try again, see if it translates correctly this time. And this time, it can't find a main routine. So our programs have to have a routine called main in them, which is essentially where it's going to start execution. And of course, I had a typo in there. I called that thing man instead of main. So once again, I'm going to go back in, see if I can edit this, type the name correctly, and try compiling again. See if it works this time. This time, it actually didn't spit any error messages out at me. This means that it thinks everything translated okay. So now I can actually try running that thing. So now I can try running the executable that it produced, and we can see what it does here. Actually, I'm going to clear the screen here, and we'll try running that. Oops. Try running that and see if it actually says hello. Yay! So this is the kind of cycle that we wind up running through. You edit, you compile, and you test. And if it throws warning messages at us or error messages at us, we go back and fix those before we move on to try and test. So that's the idea. That's the kind of cycle that we're going to be going through again and again and again as we grind through this semester. So get used to that one. I think next time around, maybe we can actually start talking about C++ itself.